I can't believe it's taken pretty much a year for us to get to this point, and honestly, Capcom should be kind of ashamed they haven't been able to do this sooner. But here's the story, right? Monster Hunter Wilds. We're just about 11 months in. It was the fourth best-selling game of 2025, but it probably would have been higher if its sales numbers didn't fall off a cliff. They've literally talked about how their sales fell off a cliff. It was being outsold by other Monster Hunter games from the past. It was being outsold by remakes and remasters that they'd done. And for many people, the reason was obvious. The PC performance. It was shambolic, it was holding the game back, but now we get to talk about things changing. Because, despite viral theories on, fixing performance and what the issue was, well, it now turns out that Capcom took some time, tried to knuckle down into the PC-specific issues, and they've actually made progress. But it is a goddamn shame that it's taken this long for something to happen. But as we've now learned, right as this new and well-received update is marking the beginning of, well, the end, actually, for the base game of Monster Hunter Wilds, Capcom is hoping that they're ready for the future. That's a future that will see them asking you for more money. So if they're going to do that with any credibility, they'll have had to have got this right. So, to start us off, by now, we have covered the Monster Hunter Wilds story so many times on this channel. Basically, here's how it all happened. Capcom needed a win to end their financial year and to clear a big hole in their expected finances. Their reward for clearing this hole was continuing their streak of 10% or more, I believe it was either revenue or profit growth, that they've been having for a decade. So it was big for their corporate story. And you know what? Wilds was a staggering financial success with over 10 million sales in its launch month. But PC players were rightly goddamn furious with the shambolic performance, and that really has not changed over time. Now, player numbers for the game have been relatively stable, and reviews mostly are coming from players who are seriously invested in the game. At least by this late stage, it's often people with 100+ hours in the game. But as 2025's patches rolled on, well, the patches didn't really move the performance needle enough to turn those reviews into positive ones. And while the hardcore stayed with the game, the problem was that nobody really came to the game. You see, the PlayStation audience that Capcom was kind of building this game for, that they literally said they were building this game for, didn't actually show up. And that's why the bad PC performance hurt them so much. They were banking on PS5 being their main platform, as it had been for prior games. Basically, without that, sales flatlined. And we recently found out that as 2025 ended, Capcom had reached 11 million sales for Wilds. Now, we can do the maths there. 10 million in a month, and then another million in a year. That's bad. And it's no wonder that Capcom then unveiled plans for a Steam-only patch. One that would need to change the narrative. And today's big story is that patch is now here. The PC-specific performance patch has finally launched, and thus far the results are actually looking pretty damn good. So, the patch is targeting the CPU and GPU pain points that were there. It also brings new high-res textures as an option, and the options for the game are now more high fidelity, which means that people can just tweak way more variables to get the performance that they want. And the early signs from this are actually positive. I mean, the game is now reportedly stable enough to run well on a Steam Deck. I don't think any of us saw that coming, but it kind of makes sense. Maybe there were some performance optimizations that they've been making for the data-mined Switch 2 port that bled in, perhaps? Now, we're finding that overall, the FPS of the game has improved. Testing from Eurogamer suggests that overall, it is substantially better, and especially so for rigs that are closer to the minimum specs. Now, as good as these moves are, it probably won't help people like this reviewer who has put 200 hours into the game on a GPU with 2 gigs below minimum for its VRAM. That's quite rough, but at least the baseline is actually rising. Now, Capcom have also addressed the viral DLC check claims. This is a crazy one. A Redditor found the game experiencing specific slowdowns depending on how much DLC was installed. Basically, it seemed there was a check that was causing CPU spikes that would then tank FPS. Now, Capcom's own testing and then Digital Foundry's testing confirmed that this bug only happened near DLC distribution NPCs in hubs, and that it didn't happen anywhere else. So it certainly doesn't seem that was causing all the problems, though it has been patched out. Where we are now, though, is still not a perfect place. This is not going to be the last PC-specific update. There are some LOD load-in changes that didn't make the stability cut for this patch, and those are going to arrive February 18th, which is just before the first anniversary of the game. And I think whenever all of that is in, that's when we'll finally see if players have overall changed their minds. But at least now I can say that the early signs of change are here and do look positive. So let's take a look at the numbers. Here's the overall review picture for Wilds. We can see that it's really quite shit, and since May, big surges of negative reviews hit around every patch release. And that's players seeing the performance changes they had hoped for not being there. Now though, we actually see that positive reviews are outpacing negative reviews again. And checking the SteamDB review chart, we see that from a peak of 165,000 negative reviews the day before the PC performance patch, that the game hasn't just gained 1,200 positive reviews, it's actually lost more than 500 negative ones. So that's players who previously left a negative review actually changing them. Now, you may hear that and think, well, yeah, of course, the problem was solved. People obviously changed their review. If only. It's actually vanishingly rare that players will go back and change a review that they left. So for 500 of those to flip is a genuinely good sign. And it is the sign that Capcom needs, because to drive growth in this game again and to make it what they need it to be financially, they need to show potential customers that players are already happy. You're not going to buy a game when its review trend is bad, but if the recent reviews end up being very positive, yeah, then they're going to get a shitload of sales. The good side of that is they're financially rewarded for fixing the performance issues, because their reputation genuinely was killing their sales. But there will be limits to the effectiveness of this. You see, English reviews are about to cross the threshold back to being positive, being 67% positive at the time of writing, and needing around 2,500 reviews to change that. Now, Chinese reviews, which are 30% of the total score, well, they're not happy. They're still sitting at 19% positive overall. Now, generally speaking, Chinese language reviews are a fair bit more harsh, and they are especially harsh on performance. And of course, the harshest reviews are coming from some of the most dedicated players, people with 100 hours or more. Changing that stuff around will take substantial effort, especially because performance changes may not be enough. There are other issues with the game. And that's because a lot of players, since day one, have simply not liked the direction that Wilds went in as a game. And while there have been some concessions towards endgame content in the patches before Christmas, that really hasn't changed massively, at least to this point. So right now, the devs are fixing what they can whilst delivering the live service. And while that's good, it certainly isn't new content. And for the people who are okay with the performance but are just tired of the content, well, things are probably not going to look radically better, I'd say, for quite some time indeed. And that's because, well, making content for a game that barely works and actively makes people angry is really silly. It's like trying to fill a leaky bucket with water. But once that stability is there, well, then Wilds will be able to take its place in Capcom's library as an evergreen title. And that's where I am really glad that we basically looked into all of Capcom's financial reports, because we can see how the company succeeds. So there's a really funny thing about Capcom, right? They effectively have proved that they don't need Wilds to succeed right now. And that's kind of helpful, because their quarterly update on sales for the game reveals that even with a 45% discount over Black Friday, they've only sold 350k copies in the last few months. For a game of this scale, the number 4 seller of 2025, that is god-awful. Now, the sales are improving, but with no major console uptake and lagging PC sales because of performance, there's really nothing to drive growth in the short term. But here's the thing. That's not really what Capcom are playing. Though, of course, it was the game that they were playing last year because they needed massive day one sales to climb themselves out of a financial hole. Just another example of how being a publicly traded company that's got to do a report every quarter maybe doesn't set the best incentives for the customer. Maybe it's as if it's all about pleasing the shareholders and not the customers, even though it's the customers who hand over money. That being the thing that the shareholders should actually want. Anyway, all of that being a bit moronic aside, here's the thing. Even with this game being in a shit state, this has actually still been one of the best years for sales that they've ever had. They had a 13.5% increase in game sales, up to 34.64 million worldwide units, and that's all from their library. It's the likes of, say, the Resident Evil series getting a big boost ahead of Requiem's launch. I mean, come on, any sane person sees that Leon Kennedy's coming back and will immediately want to just play 4 again. You've also got the continued impact of Monster Hunter Rise, Street Fighter 6, and Devil May Cry, which are all doing fairly well, and all that brought together means that even without Requiem launching soon, well, they're actually in a pretty good financial position, a good sales position, because their library is just that strong. Obviously, if Requiem is good and it doesn't have the sorts of issues that Monster Hunter has had, then they will have absolutely just crazy good financial performance, probably. But returning to Monster Hunter, Wilds is going to contribute long term. That's basically how Capcom works. That's how they get their sales. And that's the same way that the expansion, Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak, is currently outselling Wilds. That shows you just how strong the long tail of these games is. And I think it shows you what could be happening for Wilds once it's no longer a technical shit show. And it absolutely shows us the direction Capcom is heading in. Where are we at then? Well, Capcom can't go back in time. They can't use hindsight to warn their teams that building Wilds PlayStation first, neglecting PC optimization to hit their target release date, would have messy, terrible consequences. The fixes that people hoped for have actually arrived. It took a year. For some people, that's unacceptable. For me, it is unacceptable. I just think it's insane that people spent good, hard-earned money for that game the day that it came out, and that it has taken so long for those fixes to arrive. It certainly speaks to the engineering problems that perhaps existed underneath that game. But Capcom are not a company that exclusively thinks in the short term, and it seems they're learning lessons as they go. As an example, they've told investors that they, quote, do not anticipate similar risks, and they've called out developing, quote, a smooth gaming experience across a wide range of PC specifications. Now, a lot of that does sound like investor wank, but when they're talking about PC performance to their investors, well look, who does the C-suite really work to serve? The investors. They're probably talking about this because they know it will move the numbers that they want to move and make the line go up, so they clearly know that the PC build of Wilds was a problem. And now that those problems are broadly fixed, it means that the base game of Wilds can essentially end. And while the performance patches will continue, and there's a final set of endgame content updates coming, this summer will mark the announcement of Capcom's inevitable large-scale expansion for the game. And as long as they've learned their lessons and don't introduce fun, creative, new technical problems for this paid DLC, then they may end up in a position to succeed in the long run with Wilds, both financially and with player sentiment. But before any of that happens, Resi 9 is going to happen. And Capcom, if you mess around, Leon, and if that game ends up being a shit show, you'll have me to answer to, which is really not much of a threat. Anyway, I'll be looking at that one very closely. And if you enjoyed this video, I think you should check out this one next.